here remember getting sick often as a kid? Not too many of you. So as a kid, I remember I'd catch a cold maybe every month or so, and I'd go to the doctor quite often. I had asthma when I was little, and I remember even being hospitalized because of it. This was all due to the fact that I was born prematurely. So when I was born, my lungs weren't fully developed at the time, and my immune system was fairly weak. As a result, getting sick became the norm for me, and I became used to it. To this day, I still am used to it. However, as I got older, my immune system became much stronger.
We've been taught all of our lives different ways to keep our bodies healthy and to protect them from various diseases and pathogens. For example, as children, we were always taught to wash our hands. But do we truly understand how our bodies fight diseases and why we do certain things to stay healthy? There are 3 lines of defense in our bodies, just as we would expect in a sort of kingdom. The first line of defense in our body are physical barriers, such as skin and mucous membranes. This is like the moat, or the wall in the kingdom. The second line of defense in our body are the non-specific defenses, such as leukocytes and fevers. This is like a soldier protecting the borders of the kingdom. The third and final line of defense in our body are the specific defenses, such as B cells and T cells. Lastly, this is like a spy in charge of spotting rebels in the kingdom and labeling them so that assassins can then go in and deal with them. A better understanding of these 3 lines of defenses can help individuals better comprehend how to keep their bodies healthy.
So, as said before, we were taught to always wash our hands. We wash our hands to keep our first line of defense, the physical barriers, clean from any foreign pathogen. An example of a physical barrier includes our skin. Our skin simply blocks any pathogen from entering in our body. However, any breaks in our skin could allow a pathogen to enter. Another example is our mucus. Now, as disgusting as it sounds, our mucus actually traps microbes from entering our bodies, such as in our noses. On the other hand, our saliva is antibacterial. Saliva contains a number of chemical agents that protect us from any bacteria. Now, that's why you see animals often lick their wounds, since it promotes healing. However, excessive licking can be harmful.
Our second line of defense targets invaders in a more generalized way. It includes phagocytic cells. These cells ingest and destroy all microbes that pass into body tissues. An example of a phagocytic cell are called macrophages and neutrophils that are released into the bloodstream and patrol the body for any pathogens. They migrate into the infected site in response to chemical signals and ingest invading fungal and bacterial microbes. Another example of a phagocytic cell are natural killer cells that destroy virus-infected cells and cancer cells. As part of our second line of defense, our body also has an inflammatory response, which is a localized response that accounts for swelling, redness, heat, and clot formation. This is due to the dilation of the capillaries so that white blood cells and red blood cells can be transported to the site of infection. When a local response is not enough, the body produces a fever, which is a systematic response to the infection. As much as we all hate fevers, they are truly beneficial to our bodies when we are sick. In this systematic response, our body temperatures increase to inhibit bacterial growth, stimulate phagocytes, and speed up repair of tissues.
Now, our third line of defense is more specific. Antigens, cellular proteins, or name tags on pathogens can trigger this line of defense. B cells recognize intact antigens and create a humoral response. Now, there are 2 types of B cells. You have memory B cells, which are used for long-term immunity, whereas plasma B cells produce antibodies to bind to a specific antigen and make it a target for T cells. Now, T cells create a cell-mediated response, in which T cells recognize antigen fragments. There are 2 types of T cells. You have the helper T cells that alert the immune system, whereas killer T cells destroy infected body cells by identifying the cell's major histocompatibility proteins. Now, these MHCs also display antigens to give an idea of what's going on in the cell. However, autoimmune diseases such as HIV can destroy the helper T cells. Since the helper T cells are destroyed, the immune system would not be alerted, eventually leading to the development of AIDS.
In part of our third line of defense, our body develops a primary and a secondary response to pathogens. This is due to the functions of the memory B cells. When our body is infected by a pathogen, it produces an antigen, as mentioned before. When our body is first exposed to these antigens, it develops antibodies that sort of tag the pathogen for killer T cells. Our body uses these memory B cells to develop long-term immunity, just in case our body is exposed to the same antigen later on. When our body is exposed to the same antigen a second time, the memory B cells will help the body produce excessive amounts of the same antibodies to eliminate the pathogen. This secondary response provides a quicker and more efficient way of destroying the pathogens.
Now, there are two types of immunity that exist. You have passive and you have active immunity. Now, passive immunity is the occurrence in which antibodies are obtained from another individual, and this is more temporary. For example, antibodies can be transferred from a mother to her baby across the placenta, or simply through the mother's milk. Or, antibodies can also be injected to the individual, thus acquiring a short-term immunity. Now, during active immunity, an individual makes his or her own antibodies after being ill, or after being given a vaccine. For example, in a vaccine, individuals are given a dead or weakened virus that triggers the production of antibodies and thus a full immune response. This type of immunity is more permanent.
As effective as vaccines and medications are at defending our bodies and fighting diseases, these treatments have their limits. As time progresses, the invading foreign pathogens evolve to become more resistive and render them useless. On a global scale, we as humans should unite and educate ourselves on how to maintain our health and avoid illness.
Now, as the great Buddha once said, to keep the body in good health is a duty. Otherwise, we shall not be able to keep our mind strong and clean. Okay. Okay.
The second in line of defense in our body are our non-specific defenses. Non-specific defenses.
No, you were good. You were good.
No.
You could've put it off.
As the great Buddha once said, to keep the body in good health is a duty. Otherwise, we shall not be able to keep our minds strong and clear.
Oops.
As the great Buddha once said, to keep the body in health good is the duty.
What?
We shall not be able to keep. Where did we?
To keep the body in a good health is a duty. Otherwise, we shall not be able to keep our mind in strong and clear.
Indeed. All right. Yes.
Okay. We've been taught all of our lives different ways to keep our bodies.
I'm sorry, I was trying to
What were
do.
you trying to do? We wash our hands to keep our first line of defense, the physical barriers, to clean. Wait, what?
Clean from any
Oh,
pathogens.
my bad.
And look, 1 minute and 44 seconds. Pathogens evolve to become more resistive and render them useless. On a global scale, we as humans should...
Damn it! No, we were so close. We were so close.
The kingdom. The third and final line of defense in our body are the specific defenses such as